What's up, everyone? Can you hear me, Gabriel? Just wanted to make sure you can.
I can hear you.
All
Are
right,
we going to
cool.
go ahead? Are we live?
I
Yes.
yes, we're gonna go. Let's go ahead because I was like, wait, my face is on the screen. I'm like, oh, flip, I need to say something. All right, okay. So, guys, while Sihle uh, gets he's sorted out, I think let's begin the show. So, hi everyone, welcome to the Big Daddy Liberty Show, or should I say, Liberty and Friends. So, this show is obviously held every Sunday at 8 o'clock. Usually, Big Daddy Liberty is hosting the show. So, I think what we
Technical
can do,
difficulties. They
what we
plague
can
us
just say
all.
is that yeah, we're having technical difficulties, and once those are solved, Sihle will be back. So I just want to get the topics just up on my screen quickly, just to make sure that we speak about the right things. So if you look at the title of today's show, it is the Stellenbosch racism, the fuel price crisis, load shedding misery, and the 22 million rand flag. So okay. Right. So let's just start with the cost of living, Gabriel. So we saw that the governor of the Reserve Bank, Kganyago or Lisecha Kganyago, raised the interest rates. Now, obviously, that means that if you are lending, well, not lending, sorry, borrowing, you're going to have to pay pay more in your interest portion of the loan. And this is not really looking good because there's also the issue of inflation as well. So we found that there has been inflation. Well, I mean, I haven't checked the CPI data, but it seems like the price of goods and services are going up, especially from anecdotal experiences from my side, where people saying they're going into the shops and they've seen that some of the items have doubled in price. So, yeah, tell us, Gabriel, what's happening there? And like, really, should we be worried? What should we do?
This is an interesting one because I think that, I think that strangely enough, the news is not as bad as it might seem.
Okay.
So, the South African Reserve Bank, in my opinion, is probably the best, really important run government institution, and
All
has
right.
been from Crystals through Tito Mboweni through all the way to Lesesha Kganyago. Um,
All right.
there are debates within the Reserve Bank. There are clearly um, attempts that have been made to take it over and do full scale quantity easing, which is South African quantitative easing, to nationalize the bank, which itself doesn't really matter very much because it's not like the bank generates much by way of profit, but does matter in the sense that the basic function of the bank is to protect the value of the rand, is to stop rampant inflation. And here's where the news is surprisingly good. Inflation figures in South Africa are much better than pretty much everywhere in the first world. So
Okay.
if CPI from Stats SA is coming out at about between 2.9, 3.2% in the last quarter, in America, it's sitting at like 8, 9%. In parts of Europe, it's sitting at 12, 13%. So we are doing relatively well there. That together with the commodity boom, together with the war in Ukraine, have these have been factors that have kind of conspired together, as it were, to put the rand in a relatively strong position. The rand was at 14 to the dollar earlier in the year. It's dropped down to 16, sort of hovering back to 15. That is, in many ways, a flattering position. If you consider
Yeah.
that we're going into a winter of hard lockdown, if you consider that we're 1.9 million jobs down the tube since the lockdown, we're going into a winter of hard load shedding, um, and we've had a hard lockdown slashing 1.9 million jobs. So why does the Reserve Bank up the rates? Basically to stop inflation from getting out of hand, to make sure that when there's not too much free money floating around, that banks aren't just inventing it and lending it out. Um, it is tough on borrowers. It's going to be particularly tough on most people with home loans, uh, who don't have most people don't have fixed rate bonds because they get fixed at sort of 2% above whatever the rate was.
Yeah.
So they're going to be looking at paying, a lot more money every month. People with their car down payments, people with businesses that have borrowed to keep cash flow liquidity. It is definitely tough. But I've got to say, as a bit of a monetary conservative, I think it's like tough love. I think it's the right thing to do to guard the value of the rand, to make sure that we don't get into the kind of inflationary situation that so much of the first world is in. So yeah, I kind of want to raise my hat to Lesetja Kganyago. And the reason I know this is difficult is because South Africans are suffering. So it's a tough time to say well done to the Reserve Bank, especially when they are tightening the belt.
Yeah.
Can I try and interject here and see if I have audio?
Oh la la!
Yes, you have audio.
There you are.
Can you guys
Yeah.
hear me? Hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Oh my goodness, what a day. Okay, my apologies for that. It really is a case of there is water in the system. I just didn't see it now. Because of the heavy rains, I had to change cables and all of the like. Dumo, thank you, my brother, for holding it down as always.
Cool.
Dumo, the host of the Manpatria show. Welcome to it. It is Sunday, as usual, and I'm sure Dumo did a proper intro. Welcome to it. Please remember, guys, as I go back to the conversation, as I'm sure it is beginning to cook with grease, all you need to do if you are a viewer of the show is to hit that like button. Let me just remove this message about my sound issues, but hit that like button and, of course, share the stream. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. We'll be with you for the next hour or so. Apologies, I must extend apologies from fellow friends, panelists who could not make it tonight. But the house is packed, as you can see. It is packed. I've got to Prati from the Manpatria podcast. Shout out to him, man, who's joining us today. And of course, with Gabriel Crouse from the Institute of Race Relations. Gabriel, you were making the point around the cost of living, pardon me, and of course, the moves by the Reserve Bank governor. I want to throw in a question here just to keep your thought process on this. Some people will say, well, South Africa isn't much of a saving society. Therefore, an interest rate hike, pardon me, wouldn't actually necessarily be that beneficial for the average South African. And if anything, the converse is the case, where South Africa is a heavily indebted nation. Thus, the interest rate hike would actually harm them. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true that we have had one of the worst private savings rates in the world since about 2008. If you exclude corporate savings, private savings in South Africa have averaged about 0%, like between 0 and 1% per year. It's of income. It's really, 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 really hard to find anything else in the world that bad. And what goes with that is very low rates of gross fixed capital formation, which is the Stats SA fancy term for bricks, mortar, real things that actually workers can, engage with in order to be more productive. Factories, practically none of that in 2019. Negative gross fixed capital formation in 2019, and very, very low throughout the 2010s, which is why there were no new jobs. So that's right. But here's what's wrong. Private savings, on average, if you include the corporate side, was 10%. And I think the story to tell there is what that tells me is it debunks the notion that South Africans don't want to save or that we don't have it in our culture. We do have it in our culture, and people will put their money in a stokvel if they can. That's actually, as it turns out, is often a better solution than some banking solutions. But really, in order to get the most sophisticated returns, South Africa is a nightmare. Why? Because the government has basically set up a wealth tax and a capital gains tax. So why do I say a wealth tax? Because if your money increases at the same rate as inflation, your savings, you have some interest, but it's just equal to inflation, then in real terms, you've actually made no money. But in nominal terms, in the numbers that have written down, it's gone from 110 Rand to 120 to 140. They tax you on that extra. So you've gained no real value, but you get taxed on the inflation. And the inflation itself is eating away into things. Then on top of that, we have a capital gains tax. And how do you dodge it? You dodge it by investing in a pension fund, in some kind of corporate savings scheme that allows you to avoid to get the tax rebate. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but I'm saying the system has been so tightly controlled, the taxes are so high on private investment that practically everyone who can afford to save and can afford to save, in the digital economy, ends up doing it through one of those pension schemes. And that's where you see all the savings sit, or they hide it in big businesses. And that's where all the savings sit, unfortunately. And Paul Miller did a very excellent thing on this on the Center for Risk Analysis YouTube channel just this week, I think it was. Unfortunately, what that has meant is that the businesses that get invested in with those savings are always the top 100 indexed on the JSE. And there is mahala left, luto, for the Oaks with a brand new idea, a brand new brand, a new innovative way of connecting. It's very hard for them to get gas in the tank because the whole saving structure is trying so hard to run away from the taxman, because the taxman is being so pernicious that there's really none left for the smaller guys trying to climb up the ladder. And I think that is just so perverse. But you can't lay that at unfortunately you can't lay that at Kganyago's door, because if you could, I think he's a reasonable man and he would solve the problem if he could, but he can't solve that problem. That problem has to be solved in cabinet.
Yes, Dumo, one of the things I've been saying for a while as the crazy libertarian, the crazy right-winger, in my younger years, in my 20s, when I was still in varsity, I used to run this online campaign called hashtag ban income tax, because the argument I was making back then, as I still make today, is that government as an entity already takes quite a lot of money from the ordinary South African, whether that South African is a working South African or not, because we need to burst this myth that it's just working South Africans who pay tax in this country. South Africans on average pay well over 16 forms of direct and indirect tax and taxes and levies. And that's not including, by the way, municipal levies. So we are, as Mike Schussler says, one of the heavily top taxed nations in the world. The issue here becomes, Dumo, it's a moral question, isn't it? Why is it that government and the political elites, politicians and the like, why is it they should continue enjoying income, revenue, without quote unquote tightening the belt, as politicians will often tell the ordinary man to do that? There's something morally wrong with that.
Right. It is, because there is no one that's holding the states accountable in that regard, because they can demand more of our money, but when we want to keep more of our money, well, they say we're being selfish, right? So, Thomas Sowell put it this way. It's like, how much of someone else's money are you entitled to, really? Because why is it that the state can do something of that nature and we can't? And this is the problem this is the biggest problem that I think is that we have with politicians, is that they can just demand more and more and more and more of what we earn. And then the moment we push back, we are called, we are referred to as being selfish, and you don't care about other people and so forth. But there's only so much the government can take from its people until we actually until there's nothing left. If you look at the Laffer curve, for example, the Laffer curve already shows you that, look, at some point, if you tax beyond a certain threshold, you are going to get decreasing tax revenue, because people are not going to see the value in working if let's say more than half of their income will be taken away. And that's what happens over time. South Africa keeps increasing their tax, and eventually there's going to be decreased tax revenue. And what's going to happen then? So I think really the reality is that if the government wants more tax revenue, you don't increase the tax rate. What you need to do is you need to make the economy much more accessible. If there's more people working in the economy, then you can get taxes that way. Or, if there's more profitable companies, you can get taxes that way as well. But what's happening now is that the pot is getting smaller, and then the government still has its expectations. Like, if an industry is, let's say if GDP is like 3 billion, for example, in 1 year, and the government earns, let's say not even 3 billion, I'm lying. Like, let's say it's like 10 trillion in 1 year. And then of that, they get 3 trillion in taxes. And then the following year, the economy is like shrinks to 5 trillion, and then they still want to keep their 3 trillion. Like, you can't. At some point, you're going to expect, you're going to be taxing people at rates that are unaffordable. And if it's corporations, they're going to leave and set their office up elsewhere. Mauritius is just a 4-hour flight away, and so forth and so forth. Sorry, I know my camera's off. I don't know why it's off, but it's fine. I'll get it fixed now. But on my side, it's showing that it's off. Sorry, but just to sum it up, all that needs to happen is that look, taxation is morally wrong, but at the end of the day, if you're going to tax people, be fair in your taxing, and also at the same time deliver on your services as well.
Gabriel, let me throw it to you, because I want to stick with this issue of tax in a moment, but there are other facets which we'll unpack here, because what I really wanted to look at was the issue of our cost of living in South Africans. South Africans quite clearly are able to see on an everyday basis that, holy heck, my standard of living and the cost of living, my standard of living is dropping whilst the cost of living is rising continuously. And it is becoming an existential threat insofar as the maintenance of social order in this country. We might want to pretend it's away. We might want to pretend as if everything is hunky-dory, as the media and political elites try and do, especially when they tell us that racism is our biggest issue. And we'll get to that in a moment. But I want us to prosecute this issue in greater detail, because, as it relates to tax, Gabriel, the other facet I want you to chew on for a moment before we get to inflation, which is another form of tax, is, there's this issue that we face here where the arguments don't make sense. Let me be precise. We often hear the finance minister every year appearing on our TVs in a budget speech, looking to tell us about, these, and a good example is what you're sipping right now. These sin taxes, they'll tell us, are a major attempt by them to stymie the consumption, let's say, of alcohol and cigarettes and tobacco products and the like. So they clearly make the rationale that raising taxes, as it relates to sin taxes, will reduce the incentive of people wanting to consume alcohol or tobacco. But they don't seem to make that argument when they raise income taxes. That's personal income taxes. Surely, if you raise personal income taxes, it does, in a roundabout way or even directly, disincentivize someone saying, hey, maybe I want to work a bit harder and earn a bit extra, if your ability to earn that bit extra goes into the coffers of a politician.
Yeah, I think it's pretty mad, but it works very differently at different ends of the income scale. So here's, in my opinion, how it works at the top of the income scale. You put the more taxes. Then the guys with the more money pay the more lawyers to do the more tax dodging. So it doesn't really affect them directly. It sort of changes the golf roster a little bit. Some CEOs and board members are going to spend more golf circuits with the accountants and lawyers and less time with the R&D guys and the marketing guys. And that is, in the long run, actually a big problem, because the money is much better spent on research and development, on finding new products, on actual productive stuff, than it is on lawyers and accountants. But that's one end of the income scale. There's another end of the income scale which sort of bothers me. I've been doing some research this week on the national minimum wage, and it reminded me of when I was earning below minimum wage as a freelance journalist. Now, I was getting paid 2,500 Rand for a piece, but it would often take me 6 weeks to write a piece, because I'd have to go research it, and then I'd write it, and then the writing wasn't very good. And, I was like a dude in my mid-20s, and I didn't really know what I was doing. So it took me a hell of a long time to get it placed. So I'd write 2 and 1 would get rejected. Anyway, the point is, technically, I'm earning less than minimum wage. On top of that, I was getting taxed like an insane amount, because if you are registered as a freelancer and you don't have a primary employer, the backup tax rate is something like 20%. So you're earning less than minimum wage and you're paying 20% income tax. Then on top of that, we all as South Africans are doing this wonderful thing of paying 50% fuel tax. So the money that I had to spend on the taxi, the minibus taxi to go down to SARS in Randburg, there I'm paying the government another 50%, and so on down the line. I think that the oaks at the bottom of the scale, of the income scale, are obviously worse off in the sense that they're starting out with less. So every rand that they're not holding on to access of is making much more difference on the margin. But the other factor is that they don't have any ability to leverage the accountants and the lawyers. So they don't really have any ability to smooth over the rough edges. And I think that I haven't found good studies on this. I've been trying to look it up, but I would suspect that for significant parts of the population, for significant parts of the population, we actually have a regressive tax, which is to say poor people are getting taxed more than rich people, for the reasons that I've sort of highlighted in a more anecdotal way. But I think if you drill down to how much is coming out of VAT and how much is coming out of income tax from the lowest income brackets, it just strikes me as quite plausible that on the margins, those are the people that are getting really taxed the most.
Mm-hmm. No, I definitely agree with that. I think the numbers will bear themselves out. And maybe I should have one of those super economics episodes once again where I stack the house full of economists. I'll try and arrange that for next weekend here on Liberty and Friends. I'm talking the likes of Darby Ruitt, Mike Schussler, if he's back on his feet, Bheki, Mahlobo, who is meant to be with us tonight, and of course, a full house of other such eminent economic minds in the country. But guys, Gabriel, you're raising that important point here, which is a discussion around what are we incentivizing and what are we disincentivizing in this country? Are we really rewarding the productive, the entrepreneurial, the industrious, the hard-working individual? Or are we creating a set of conditions where welfare, by and large, and again, I'm diverting a little bit, but still on topic, but welfare is seen ever increasingly as the I don't even want to call it the safe haven, because it isn't much of a safe haven, because it comes with a double-edged sword, which you raised, Gabriel, which is even if you're someone who is on welfare, the amount of direct and indirect taxes you will pay on that check that you receive from the government effectively renders you as the walking dead, in a sense that you're poor. Even though the rhetoric is, oh, the state is supporting you in a way. But I think there's a further conversation to be had here, which is aside from the taxes, South Africans can feel the value of the very rands in their pockets not go as far as they were maybe, let's say, 6 months ago or even a year ago. And that brings in the issue of inflation. Gabriel, I'll stick with you and I'll come to Dumo in a moment. Inflation is quite literally the monster that is rearing its head right now. And we're being told by politicians, especially if you look at Western politicians, one Joe Biden in particular, oh no, he'll say, inflation is not his fault or that of his administration, but rather it's the fault of Vladimir Putin and his deciding to invade Ukraine. That's why there is an inflation outlook in America and globally, and of course here in South Africa, which is literally becoming a massive headache. Americans sitting at 8.5% inflation at the moment. I think South Africans are still within that target band we often hear, but it's also climbing up in this part of the world. Gabriel, very briefly, what is inflation? And of course, why are we seeing the inflation right now? Is it because of Putin? Or are we seeing the effects now of those 2 years, if you will, of no economic activity, but rampant money printing and government spending?
Yeah, so inflation is definitely a tax. I will disagree with some of the commentators. Like, I think taxes are good. We absolutely need tax. Why? Because we need property rights. And you need someone to pay the police to defend the stuff, pay the judges to run the courts properly, and so on and so forth. So some taxes have definitely got to be justified, and inflation is one of those taxes. Now, it turns out, on the best available empirical data, that if you're sitting at an inflation rate of 1 or 2 or 3%, then that's pretty good. Japan had negative inflation for a long time, and that was really bad for its economy. So, not all inflation is bad, but some inflation is just about the worst thing that it can be. What is inflation? Inflation is what happens when more money is chasing the same amount of goods. So if you've got 100 goods in the market and you've got 100 rand, each one costs 1 rand, and you print another 100 rand. Now you've got 200 rand chasing after 100 things. Now each thing costs 2 rand. So, if you were just holding on to your 10 rand before, you could buy 10 things. Now you can only buy 5 things. That sucks, and we all know what it feels like to go and see the price of milk go up by 5 rand a liter over 3 years. Over the last 3 years, I think it's gone up by something like that. It's crazy, and then you end up, unless you have a big raise, buying less milk. So that's the problem. Now your question is, who causes inflation? I really think that one does well to read Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize economist, who really passed away a decade ago or so, but lived to a ripe old age and got the prize because he analyzed quantitatively the story that had been just told as a narrative of the greatest economic collapse in the United States, the Great Depression. And before that, the story had been, the government was too laissez-faire. They weren't clipping the rich enough. And so then people were just, drinking too much and gambling too much. And then the whole economy blew up. No, actually what happened is the Federal Reserve, the guys with the money printer, did the wrong thing at the wrong time. And they turned a recession into a Great Depression. Now, what the Federal Reserve has done over the last 2 years or 3 years, in cahoots with Congress and the White House and both parties in the United States, Biden more than Trump, but both parties, has been to oversee the largest printing of money, metaphorically speaking, in the history of humankind. And that has absolutely directly caused the inflation that we see in America. And I can give you a very concrete example. My fiance, because she's an American student, got those checks. She's sitting in South Africa, she still gets the checks. So she gets like a check for $750, a check for $1,400, a check for, she got like $2,000 from the government. And then you look at it 2 years later, and it's like, if you look at the whole saving situation, it's like all inflated away. If someone had saved up $10,000, then that $2,000 would have just brought them back to where they were before, because now it costs $12,000 to buy what it used to cost $10,000. And unfortunately, we don't have $12,000. So there's a kick in the teeth. I think that it's also important, however, to see that it's not just the last 2 years. It actually dates back, you can take it to 78. You can take it back at least 4 decades. In America and in a lot of the first world, central banks have kind of helped bad political situations where politicians are taking people's money in the form of taxes, which is fine if they're spending it well, but they're not spending it well. They're burning that money up. They're eating that money. They're corruptly wasting that money. They're just ruining it. And that's creating a drag on the economy. And to make up for that, central banks pump extra money. And it's a balancing act that sort of works for a time, but it stops working every time. The collapse of France in the build-up to the French Revolution in the 1700s, the collapse of the Dutch Empire in the 1600s, the collapse of the Spanish Empire in the 1400s, the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Eastern one and the Western one. Pretty much every major civilization that's collapsed has collapsed the same old way. The dudes in the middle of the government have printed too much money, one way or another, too much coinage, debasing. There's various ways to do it. But it's always been the same way. And that's the game that America's played. And it's going to have to work flippin' hard to bear the next 20 years. I mean, they're going through a little thing now, but the next 20 years are going to be complicated for them. And they can blame Vladimir Putin. It's not going to solve the situation because he came very late in the day. He is not the source of the problem. If anything, I reckon that situation is a symptom of the deep problem of too much free things floating around for those in power and too much hard disincentives for hardworking poor people to climb the ladder by adding value, straightforward and simple.
Yeah, yes, Dumo. It gets even funnier for me when those same politicians, perhaps not understanding Leo basic economics, really. Speaking about basic economics, there's a book by Thomas Sowell of that same title, Basic Economics, which I would really encourage most people to read. And I'm sure as I'll send a free copy to Cyril Ramaphosa, even the Minister of Finance. Those same politicians, when I Dumo, insist on spending even more money, printing even more money and sending it to frivolous causes of their liking, and causes, of course, that benefit nobody in a society. Again, let me stick with the Americans for a moment, but we have local examples here too. The Americans and this insistence on sending $40 billion. Now they're asking for another $48 billion to a Ukraine, when Americans themselves right now, when at Dumo, are suffering like there is no tomorrow. What they call petrol prices, in some parts of the country, topping about $7 per gallon in that part of the world. And I did say I'll keep it local insofar as an example. Our asinine politicians here are no different. One Natim Teto, this made news this week, insisting, he said at the beginning of the week that, we've got to spend 22 million rand on the quote unquote national flag, he says. This flagpole that will be more than 100 meters in the air, and the flag would be seen from far and wide, and it'll instill, quote, a national pride in this country, close quote. That douchebag met with much resistance from not only the ordinary public, but his own boss. The president said, hey, man, cut that shit out. We don't need a 22 million rand flag. An aloofness, Dumo, an obliviousness by these political elites to how ordinary people, the faith flag family, freedom type individual, whether they're American or South African, is suffering.
Right. I mean, if talking about the flag, I think that this is just another situation where the government wants to take advantage of a tender and then, fund their buddies. I mean, anyone with the brain between their ears can see that, no, there's something dodgy about this. And it's quite clear that any justification for a poll of 22 million, in my opinion, there must be some less obvious reasons as to why that is the case. Some people even said that, well, it's going to benefit black businesses. And I was just like, really? I mean, what do they mean by black business? I mean, we all know what they mean by black business. That's obviously ANC affiliated businesses. So, and also, I mean, if the economy was doing well, this 22 million rand flagpole story may not even hit the news because of the fact that everyone or most people are doing better than before. So if they want to have these 22 million rand flagpoles, just allow the economy to flourish. But they're not doing that. And now because the economy has shrunk, people are suffering, inflation is going up. When citizens hear that 22 million rand is going to a flagpole, definitely people are going to resist that. And I think I just think also it's a level of naivety from Natim Teto as well. I think this is just what happens. I just think, in my opinion, there were people within cabinet that wanted this thing to go through, but because of the resistance, they decided just to say, oh yeah, let's just leave it alone. But I do think that this is something that, in my opinion, just shows really how disconnected the government is with people. Because really, if it occurred to them that, I mean, didn't anyone say, hey, isn't this going to get resistance? I mean, 22 million rand for a flagpole. Come on, man. Like, people are going to talk about this. I mean, someone should have told them that, but they just went ahead. And and also, if you look at Ramaphosa making a comment on that as well, I mean, as a joke to the black business, council, whatever they call that thing. Even in that situation as well, I mean, he shouldn't even mention it. He just should have gone to Natim Twitter behind closed doors and just say, listen, just stop the project. We won't talk about it again. See you later. That's it.
And yes, guys, we need to understand something here, Gabriel. This flag was not the only incident where, again, the political elites simply are not attuned to the suffering that ordinary people are facing on the ground. Let's not forget, guys, this is the same government that tried to pay out to their cronies in Cuba at face value 50 million rand. But AfriForum later found out that actually it was as high as 350 million rand that was being planned to be siphoned off. Effectively, I want to use the word laundered off to those Cuban commies, as if we South Africans, contrary to what the politicians say, we owe a debt of gratitude, they often say, is the reason cited for giving these commies our hard-earned rands that are stolen from us, by the way, as citizens. It just boggles the mind that you have a political elite who are facing political death. Gabriel, I mean, the ANC is literally facing loss in the upcoming elections, still insisting on doing things like this, which really I fail to see how it gains them any votes or even credence with the electorate.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a general proposition, the thought that the ANC government is just about the most amazingly blind to the circumstances that it's facing is probably fair of the moment. I see reference to Zimbabwe and Venezuela. Of course, there have been other governments that have had their moments. The ANC is definitely going through one. And my favorite example of late is the SAA one, where Pravin Gordhan started as, Minister of Public Enterprises by saying SAA can fly, and then pumped another, I think it amounted to about, 7 billion rand on top of another 11 billion, on top of 35 to 40 billion that had already been pumped into bailing out SAA. It still didn't fly. And then we sold SAA for free, accepting we're still paying back the debt as the taxpayer. I mean, literally, if you'd given it away, that would have been better. Because if you just gave it away, then you wouldn't still have to be paying the debt. Okay. And the way that deal has been managed and just smacks of crony capitalism too. Reminds me actually of the worst aspects of the 90s in Russia, and something that South Africans should be very aware of, is that privatization is not necessarily a winning proposition if it means selling a valuable government asset to a private entity in a way that punishes the taxpayer but allows one individual to become very rich. Privatization, like everything else worth it in life, is a good idea only if you execute it properly. And that requires a lot of vigilance. So as a general matter, dude, we're just wasting the most amount of money. The fact that we're still trying to fix all of Eskom rather than just selling off the two most absurd coal-fired power station projects in the history of humankind, Medupi and Kusile. South Africa, of all countries, decided after failing to maintain Eskom that it was going to try and build at the time the largest coal-fired power stations in the world. We would be this experimenters, and then decided to really make the project fabulously interesting by having sort of Japanese companies do the one part, and then the part that's all the way around that part be done by the French, and then the part that's around that part be done by the Germans, so that you have the maximum opportunity for kickbacks from around the world. And most importantly, you can get as many companies as possible to team up with Hitachi, which is sort of owned by Chancellor House, which, by the way, is run by the ANC, because that's how you get a BEE partner for the win. That entire fandango should just be privatized so that one company can consolidate, make them work at capacity. And if they were working at full powered capacity, we would have no load shedding this winter. So I really think that if you care about, if you care about ordinary poor South Africans, think about, I've got a generator, lucky me. It flipping cost me an arm and a leg. I eat porridge in the morning so that I've got diesel to put that thing to go in the afternoon. But a lot of people don't even have any form of heating and are relying on an efficient grid to deliver reliable electricity so that they can go and get a piece job, so that they can get food fuel to combine with a little something else to hold them through the winter. And this is a winter that we are entering 2 million jobs behind. It's not on. I want to say one more short thing about the flag, which is controversial. I think the flagpole is fine. I think it's, if it had happened, it would have been no bother to me. I'll tell you why. I looked it up. 5 million rand of that 22 million is complete rubbish. 5 million rand was to go and survey the area to see if it can handle a flagpole. That is pure corruption. So I'd be unhappy about that. The other 17 million, as far as I can tell, looking at major flags that are 100 meters, 120 meters, whatever, in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, I think that is actually how much it costs. 17 million rand wouldn't be a bad deal. I agree with you, now's not the right time. But here's why I wouldn't have minded it. At least I'd be able to see the money. Do you know what the budget is for Minister Tetwa's department? That budget every year is 5.3 billion rand. And I can't see much of that money. I can't see much of it at all. And when I go and dig into their books, I'm seeing a lot of salaries, and I'm finding it very hard to see what is being produced by the Department of Arts and Culture. The Johannesburg Art Gallery, which I love, the greatest art gallery on the continent, with 1 million works in its collection, with Gerard Sokoto's, with George Pemba's, with Pablo Picasso's, Andy Warhol's. Dude, I saw Andy Warhol's there. Andy Warhol just got auctioned, highest selling American artist, $180 million for one of his paintings. Dude, I saw Andy Warhol's sitting in water on the floor in the Johannesburg Art Gallery because the roof was stolen, because corrupt tenders were given out to not fix the thing properly, because some guy came to repair the fumigation thing and ripped it out, and then that leaked as well. We have, like, dude, I'm sure that collection is worth at least 1 billion rand. And the parts of it that haven't been stolen, if some parts have been stolen, have all been shipped off to Europe or hidden away, or they're literally sitting in a position where they could be wasting away in flooded water. That place has been closed for years. The department's budget is 5.3 billion rand, and it can't fix one roof for the greatest gallery in this country, on this continent, the greatest place where poor people should be able to go for free to go and see something beautiful, to get a break from their day. You know, the first guy who took me there was a Zimbabwean who came to South Africa in the 1980s, in the heart of apartheid, to try and find a job. And he flippin' did not like his life. He was working very hard to try and set something up so that he could go back, buy a little plot of land, start a family. And he said the best thing about his day was he could go and look at that art for free in the Johannesburg Art Gallery in 1989. It was easier for that guy to go and see art in 1989 in Joburg CBD than it is for anyone today. It's so backward. It's so irritating to me. I think that we do need some beautiful things. I think our flag is a very beautiful thing. This project, it has been scratched by Ramaphosa. That's fine. I'm not trying to argue that it should come back. I'm just saying that really, if you could just cut the Department of Rural of Arts and Culture in half and actually spend the other 2.5, you could give us back 2.5 billion. Spend the other 2.5 billion nicely. Fix the museum, put up the flag, make tourist destinations that actually attract people. But the easiest way to do that is just cancel the flipping lockdown, cancel the masks, cancel the rubbish, let tourists come back, come watch rock concerts and cultural things. Where's the minister fighting for cultural things like rock concerts and rugby games and soccer games to be free for people to attend? This guy, I agree with you that he's not doing his job. I just think the flag is the small tip of a much bigger story.
Well, I can extend that by saying the much bigger story for me. And by the way, I'll disagree with you here on this flag issue. I like most government spending, I don't actually think it should exist at all. I believe there should be severe limits on the size of government to what is its rightful functions. And I know we'll agree on this to a large point, and I do take your larger point on the flag, but I would even not even give them this inch, if you will. And that is, we're already at that point now, Gabriel, where the simple equation is this: someone has to take a shave. It's either the ordinary South African and that struggling Koko who lives in Khayelitsha right now, who is, as we say in Zulu, upatenisa amasend. They're literally scratching those darkest scents together to try and eke out an existence. Or it's that middle class but struggling individual. Maybe Uma is a nurse, Ubaba is a police officer who live in Deep Kloof, somewhere in Gauteng. Or maybe it's upper middle class individual who lives here in Mhlanga, in Durban, but still are feeling the effects of the rising cost of things. It's either those people, the faith, flag, family, and freedom type South African, who take a further shave, who have to now, when they walk through a grocery shop, have to really discern between, should I buy my usual milk brand that I like, that we enjoy, or should I get a cheaper version if there is a cheaper version, or should I forgo even having milk at all? Because that's the kind of decisions that people are making now in grocery stores. Take a walk around a grocery store and watch how people are just it's almost as if we're beginning to be people who browse also. We do window shopping, even in grocery shops where we're meant to be buying our basics. Too. That's the shame of South Africa today. And that's the shame in which our politicians have gotten us to this point where it is the ordinary South African who's taking that shave I speak of. So I come back to the original question I wanted to pose. It's either, guys, it's the ordinary South African who continues to take a shave and the society becomes poorer and poorer, or finally, we begin to have that libertarian or classical liberal moment where we say, actually, how about it's the government and politicians who take the shave and we reduce the size of the state, and all that extra quote unquote money that is then saved over, we pay back our debts, and of course, we see more resources being pumped into our society. We've got to have that moment, Gabriel. I don't know if I'm wrong on this one, but Dumo, let me come to you. I'll come to Gabriel because I know you want to chew on that issue in a moment. But, for me, now, Dumo, it's becoming that moment now where the battle of ideas is becoming critically important. It's a life or death situation for many. And I'm very worried, Dumo, about the populism that develops when a society becomes very poor and the politics of envy starts to filter in, and populist voices who trade on that envy then start saying, look at that person who's doing much better than you. Let's target them, because if we target them and we take from them, then Tina, the poor, the disaffected, the victims of society will do better. We saw this with the Bolshevik Revolution, of course, the rise of communism in that part of the world where, they targeted Bolsheviks. And by the way, Bolsheviks were not necessarily rich farmers by any stretch of the imagination. This is someone who maybe had a little bit of land, maybe a cottage and a cow or two, but because they were, relative to the rest of others in society, the poorer individuals, those who then saw the politics of envy as being justified, morally justified, because hey, why should there be poor people when we're, why should there be rich, in inverted commas, people when we're poor? I worry too much. That's what I want to throw to you about that possibility as society becomes poorer, that we then see those populist voices who trade on the politics of envy, a la the communists and socialists.
Yeah, this is prime time for the communists and socialists to speak up. Whenever government messes up in the economy and so forth, they'll come through and say, well, you are poor because of this guy and that guy and that guy. You always need an instigator. And that's what happens. And even in China, during their civil war, after the civil war, when Mao took over, they even had a land reform policy where they first targeted. I saw the comment, not Bolsheviks, but kulaks. Yeah. So what happened in China is that they first targeted wealthy landowners, and then they got mobs against those guys. And then afterwards, they went after peasants, and said that these guys were exploiting the other peasants and so forth. And it gets crazy to that level. And I think this is the problem that's happening now, is that these like left-wing ideologies, they are they find very fertile soil in situations where there's a lot of dissatisfaction within society. And then they'll say, yes, we feel your pain, we understand, and the reason is because of this guy, and it's not that guy. It's something else, something much deeper. But because they can simplify the story for these individuals, people will just believe them. And then they will fight, and then they get into power, and then guess what? The same thing happens, and then the same cycle of failure occurs as a result of that. So I think that like, in this time in South Africa, I think people just need to be very vigilant. You have to understand how an economy works, guys. That's the first thing. If you understand how an economy works, you can see when a politician is just saying things just to protect themselves. As Thomas Sowell was even saying, as he said, that politicians are only there to make sure they only have two things that they want to do: get re-elected or get elected, right? Anything than that, they won't even pay attention to it. I mean, the third thing that they're looking for is something that's far down the road anyway and less valuable than 1 and 2. So I think people just need to understand it. This is why I prefer having the libertarian ideologies that, look, you're on your own, man. You're on your own. I mean, if Steve Biko was alive today, he wouldn't say, black man, you're on your own. You'd just say, hey, South African, you're on your own. Get that generator, just stay healthy, eat the right foods, because the healthcare system is messed up. Everything is messed up. So you might as well just do it on your own, and just see what you can do. Because really, the reality is very simple. The government is not going to solve this problem, because the power that they have and the incentives that they have in front of them, it will produce the outcomes that we see today.
That's right, absolutely. And shout out to Graham McTaggart for just pointing that out about a little error in my ordering. It was the Bolsheviks, rather, that were the ones who were targeting the gulags. And of course, there's a great book on this by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, The Gulag Archipelago. And I really encourage people to read that, because it gives you a good indication, and perhaps you'll be able to even see modern day parallels as to what happened back then, and with even our politics today. About Julius Malema et al. Those people are not a new aberration; they've been around. Gabriel, I know you want to chime in on this one. We've had these conversations, and before you do, welcome to it. People, remember, this is Liberty and Friends. We often unpack the news items that were topical in the week. We've kind of mishmashed it quite nicely in a conversational way here tonight. But if you're enjoying the conversation, we're going to be on your screens, for another 28 minutes or so. Please hit that like button. Do it right now. It will literally help me fight a commie or two in the streets of South Africa. Hit that like button and help this show grow to a bigger audience. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Gabriel, your thoughts on this before I move us on to our sort of last two issues.
So I want to say that I think my biggest worry in general is that South Africa misses the boat, is that we get to the point where the government has failed so badly that any reasonably informed person that is still holding on to a basic sense of morality and prudence is going to want to vote them out. But by that time, they won't really be able to. That by that time, it'll be a little bit too late. That, there's a slippage. There's a really funny thing that happens between, Venezuela 1995 and Venezuela 2015. That happens between Zimbabwe 1985 and Zimbabwe 2005. There's a thing where the word democracy stays there, but the meaning of that word doesn't stay there. And it happens really like a frog boiling in water. Someone knows very well how that works. It happens so slowly you don't notice it. So we're at a T-junction in a way, where either we can take a turn. I completely agree. We have to take a turn to smaller government. This government has to be reined in. The size of spending, the size of taxation in South Africa, it has to be reined in. We are so inept and incapable as a government. It has to get smaller and focus on the things it can do. That I agree. But the funny thing about the T-junction is it's not a matter of turning right or turning left. It's a matter of going straight or taking a turn to the right. In other words, the bad option is just more of the same. If we continue with more of the same, and I do mean it specifically with voting, that can either mean we follow the trend where the ANC has dropped below 50% and you can see a change, whatever other party. I think that is the only way that we can get out. But if it's more of the same, as in the ANC stays in power, I don't at the moment see any reason to believe we're going to get much better. And that's why I'm making my point about the flag. Ramaphosa has had a very nice news cycle out of this thing, where he said, you know what, guys, Sihle, Dumo, you guys want me to cut government spending. Hey, well, here I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to go tell the business guys, cancel it. I told Minister Ntetwa, you can come to the meeting. We don't need a meeting. Just cancel that thing. It's no good. Must listen to the people. Don't be too aloof. Dude, it is a symbolic cancellation. It is 22 million rand out of a department that has a budget of 5.3 billion rand. That's what bothers me, is that is that we will get this thing. It's like when Ramaphosa went and handed out 22 title deeds in some township. That doesn't. I'm happy for those people. I am happy for those people. It's a wonderful thing. But we need 22 million title deeds to be handed out. We need proper structural major reform. The symbolic stuff, if it must go any direction, it should go. I don't care about the symbolic stuff, excepting to make my second point very briefly. I don't want us along the journey. In fact, I think it's essential for us to take this journey of turning South Africa into a robust democracy in the political science sense, where it means there's a change of power that's peaceful while keeping the same constitution. We need that. I don't think we get that without remembering some love for our country, some patriotism, some reason to remember that in a certain sense, if this thing does fall apart, it's going to drag us all down with it. And that we do need to pull together a little bit to make that change, and pull together, by getting 12 million votes or whatever it takes. And together with that, to just remember that culture, it's not just a drain, it's a way to make money. It can be very productive. Places that embrace their culture, you don't have to go full Hollywood and woke Netflix or whatever. There really are wonderful South African creative people. I think our artistic output, our musical output, our sporting output, all of those things that fall under that department. I don't want that to be tarnished by this issue. That is actually a moneymaker if you do it right. That is something that puts bread on the table for highly skilled people and for unskilled people that are coming there to collect the tickets as people go in. It is like, that's a good first job, is to go work at a stadium. And our stadiums are crushed right now. So again, I just want to say, my favorite moment with the flag is not the pole. It's in 2020 when I saw lots and lots of individual South Africans have those little flags. Many of them put them on the window of their cars. Many of them had them around. We private citizens showing that flag. That does make me believe that we can get somewhere together. And I think that's important, because we have to dig ourselves from underneath the ANC and the EFF together.
Fully agreed on that latter bit, but the question will always be, and I'll leave the question here. It's a bit of a cheeky one. Does any of this actually need the state? Does it need the state to spend our money to achieve any of this? I'm going to leave this as an open question. I want the comment section to go buzz with it, but I must move us on, guys, and not necessarily depart too far, insofar as I want to complete the picture, therefore, around how the ordinary South African can feel. We can feel it around us. That our standard of living is dropping and the cost of living is increasing. One such entity which is almost front and center, and I saw some comments in the comment section to this point, is Eskom, guys. We're continuing to see the situation of load shedding. We've touched on it here and there, but I want to zoom in on the economics behind it, if you will, or rather the economic effects of it on the pockets of the ordinary citizen. There's a guy here in the comment section, I just forgot who he was, a student. He said that, hey, I spent 700 Rand on electricity and only got 200 units of power, obviously to load on their I think it was Ngobi who actually made this comment. That to maybe those of us who are in the middle class, it sounds trivial and trite. 700 Rand for 2 units, you be pish posh, be grateful that you even have electricity. But the truth of the matter is, this is a serious issue. Gabriel, you touched on it earlier on around this notion of there are people who are quite literally dependent on the grid to even just stay warm through this winter. But there's a bigger issue here. We have a situation where, again, it is a stubbornness and perhaps an ideological stubbornness that prevents politicians from seeing what is the blatant truth at this point. Continuing to pursue a policy of one provider of electricity is absolutely tragic for not only South Africans, but the economy. If South Africa is to endure, we've got to kill this idea that Eskom is a sole provider of power. Gabriel?
Yeah, I totally agree. In a way, I think that I think it's naive to think that Eskom will ever go away. You can't sell all of Eskom for sort of technical reasons. In particular, the distribution is probably going to have to stay in state hands for the foreseeable future. But in terms of power generation, it is just absurd. And again, this thing, dude, you've got to maybe I'm too cynical, but like Ramaphosa canceling the 22 million rand flag, handing out 22 title deeds. It also sounds like when he said, no, you've got 100, we'll lift the ceiling to 100 megawatts. You guys can generate 100 megawatts. You see how nice I am? I'm being nice to the private sector. I'm saying you guys can get in there and generate 100 megawatts. That is absurd. The way this thing works with electricity, that's like telling someone that you can start like a McDonald's restaurant, but you're allowed to sell 1 Big Mac per hour. It just doesn't work that way. The business only works if you can be pumping things through. This is not like making wedding dresses where you can make one a month and you're doing well. You have to be pumping it out. Really, I think my view is that you should start out by saying which are the power stations that are the most complicated, that are the most underperforming, and therefore are going to benefit the most from superior management, staffing, and operational capacity. That is a simple, practical question. And on all of those measures, Medupi and Kusile just clearly stand out. So start out with that. And that will be so big that it really would take us from having to have load shedding consistently through winter to being fine for this winter. It wouldn't take us to next winter because the connection between Eskom and GDP is that we are producing no more electricity than we did 12 years ago. We are also producing no more of the whole GDP than we were 12 years ago. When you Eskom is a ceiling on top of our heads, we can't grow. So as soon as you allow Eskom to grow in its capacity, the economy will grow. Then we'll get back to load shedding until you get to a point where you have proper pre-planning and production. But that's fine. If we can at least have 3 years of respite and growth, that'll be getting us on the path. And I think that the reason that's not happening, although it would be simple, and although it would still leave the commies and the socialists with 80% of the grid to run themselves, is that it would be so obvious how quickly things change. I mean, there are international companies that have specialized in this kind of turnaround project and that have pulled it off in emerging markets. There are great case studies that you can go and check out. This is, it would be a blinding victory. And I do think I'm sort of irritated with all of the political parties at the moment, but I think that those political parties in Cape Town that have been trying to promise no load shedding and have achieved it to a certain extent, at least, for example, in the City Bowl, are making the kind of difference that is just so obvious. You don't need someone to explain it to you. We had a conference with some of our colleagues at the IRR on Friday and Thursday, and all the guys who flew up from Cape Town said they haven't had load shedding in a year. And I wanted to tell them to fly back to Cape Town. I didn't want to hear that, honestly. But at the same time, when I hear the coalition in Joburg and in Mpofalatse, our mayor, saying we are looking at a practical avenue to achieve that in Johannesburg, I think to myself, this is the richest city in Africa. Its biggest problem in terms of creating jobs is that the lights don't always turn on. Solve that problem, and you will be greatly rewarded, because ordinary people will be much, much improved in their basic circumstances. And I think at national level, the precise reason that they're not going for selling off a couple of power stations is because commies and socialists are terrified of what happens if it works. What happens if you privatize 2 power stations and it improves the situation so well that ordinary people in townships and rural areas across the country go, this is nice, this is better. Why is it better? Because they privatized it. Then those people will go after that idea. I think it's being blocked because those politicians are afraid of people seeing that it works.
Dumo, I mean, that last point is actually quite important, because it comes back to what I really wanted to actually chat with you, which it does seem as though we've been fighting or correction, let me rephrase this question. The loudest voice in South Africa has always been the voice that says the government must. So the government must own this, the government must do that, the government must run this, the government must tax this, the government must, blah, 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 you name it. Whereas there is an underlying impulse, an almost gut feeling that most people have, which is actually, I should do this. My family should own that. My community should run this. Our cooperative, our business, if you will, should enjoy the proceeds of. And it seems as though the latter is not the loudest voice in the room, but it's definitely the biggest voice in the room. But it just hasn't translated into our politics. We haven't seen that South African who recognizes the incompetence of government on every other thing that the government touches, especially politicians who are of a leftist persuasion, if those politicians are in government, because you do have politicians on the right too, that do asinine things that are pro-government. But in effect, it's been that South African who doesn't see government as the all-important father figure, if you will, in society that must run everything. It's that South African, who simply hasn't had their voice translated into policy in the circles of power. But it does seem as though ever increasingly that South African is raising their voice, not necessarily when it comes to policy, but in terms of them saying, you know what? If we're going to insist on government doing this and government doing that, as I freeze on screen, then quite simply, what I'm going to...
He's gone. He'll be back shortly. But I mean, I'll just give you my take on this. I think with Eskom, I said this many times. If you look at Eskom now, I think in 2009, they produced 97% of the electricity in South Africa. And the end of last year, it's now at about 89%. All right. Then now, if you look at Eskom's in the last 10 years, Eskom has produced, I think, 7% less electricity when you compare 2011 to 2021, right? And if you look at independent power producers, their production more than doubled during the same period. So I think the answer is there, guys. It's very simple. I think with Eskom, they must just, this is very simple what Eskom has to do. A lot of, one person was telling me that they're trying to maintain substations that have already passed their life, what do you call it, their life expectancy or life cycle, whatever they call it. They should be shut down. So I think we just need to be honest and say, okay, guys, what is it how much can Eskom actually produce? As opposed to just trying to fix these small problems, like having a car that keeps breaking down every day and then you get it fixed and it breaks down the next week. Let's be honest. Maybe Eskom cannot produce as much as they say they can. And I think it goes back to what Gabriel said, that 100 megawatt limit, it may need to be taken off. Maybe I think NERSA has to play a role in just ensuring that each and every power station that's in the country has to just meet safety and regulation standards and so forth. And that's the role that they need to play. We need more electricity. It needs to get pumped. There's so many people that are willing to invest in South Africa, but because these politicians don't want to see past their own stomachs. I mean, I don't know why. Let me put it to you this way. I think these guys are really being silly, because if I was part of them, I would have been like, guys, think about it. If there is no load shedding, we will get votes, right? Because every time the economy does well,
win.
Exactly.
They can cancel it by 2024. Exactly. They'll totally win.
So think about it. Then you're like, and you guys want to steal more money. I'm not, okay, now, we know the narrative that the government steals money. I'm like, well, and this is obviously in a private setting. I'll be like, well, you guys want to steal the money, right? So let's extend that period by at least ending this whole load shedding nonsense, and we can steal more money, because now we shortening that period, and now we're going to steal more money like there's no tomorrow, and we're all going to be in jail, something like that. But I mean, it's so simple. Just let the IPPs produce. I'm not even saying that Eskom must be even privatized. Eskom can still exist. Just release that limit so we can just have electricity. That's all it is. And that's it. And the normal South African who says this, I'm not even an engineer, right? And we all, none of us are engineers, but we know the solution, right? So clearly there's someone there at the Thuli house who probably knows the solution. That guy must speak louder or something. I don't know. But those voices are not being heard. They're not being heard. And like, if you look at the CCP, they had a ding. So where's the ding in the ANC? There should be someone there who's seeing all of this and saying, hey, bruh, guys, let's be smart about this. Come on. I'm just saying. That's my take.
Guys, I must move us on.
Can I say one small thing about Ding? Just one sentence.
Sure, but just be
Dumo.
mindful, we only have 9 minutes and we're going to have to go on to the Stellenbosch issue in a moment. Yeah, go ahead.
Dumo, I just want to say I totally agree with you. But if you want to get very depressed, you should read the Umrabulo documents, the discussion documents that the ANC sets up in the build-up to its conferences. The last stellar one was 2019. It was a humdinger. But they've just released the one building up to this 2022 conference. And basically it says, if Deng ever shows up inside the ANC, we must slaughter him.
Yeah, pretty much. Man,
There
the
you
ANC
go.
is literally guys. The ANC manifesto of 2024 will quite literally read like the longest political suicide note ever. Like, I don't see these people recognizing the power of actually going in the other direction so as to win the votes and stay in power. But guys, I must move us on, because if there is anything I want us to chew on as the mainstay of tonight's topic is this: are we being dribbled and distracted by a political elite, a corporate media in this country, where after we've just had a near on 1 hour, 15-minute conversation around the real issues we face in this country, issues that popped up even, if you will, in various headlines in the week, the one thing that dominated headlines for the longest of time was a very local, a very arguably, I want to say the word isolated issue that happened on a university campus. And that was at the face value, insofar as the evidence we have before us, a student walked into another student's room in the early hours of the morning and proceeded to pee in the corner and on some of the items of this other student. And the other thing, of course, that must be mentioned, because it formed the mainstay of what we were told to focus on, was the race of the two students, with the one peeing on the in this person's room was white, and of course the one being peed on or having his stuff peed on was black. Now, I mention this because that was obviously the issue. It popped up as, oh, this must be a case of racism. Now, there was no evidence for that necessarily, but in this country, if ever there is an incident between two people of different races, the default we often hear in the media is that it's racism. Gabriel, I'm going to end with you, but I want to come to Dumo first, because, as I said, we started hearing all sorts of things here, Dumo, and lots of questions being posed around this issue, but very little in the way of actual for example, the one I want to throw to you, we were told, for instance, that, oh, there is a video circulating of the white student actually saying, oh, this is what we do to black boys, apparently was said. But I kept insisting, for example, myself on social media, show me the evidence of him saying that. Show me that particular video, and I'll stand with anybody who says this is racism and this boy must be dealt with in that sense of this being a racist incident. Whereas the argument I've been making so far is that aside from the racism claims, it is sheer disgusting for you to, even if you're drunk, to walk in and pee on someone's stuff. I mean, even if you're drunk, that is just simply just uncivilized and uncouth thing to do. But that seemingly is not enough. We must find racism in order for this incident to actually be a thing. Dumo?
Right. I think, we've seen many incidents like this, and I won't be long, sorry. We've seen Ashton Willemse. We saw other incidents of this nature where there was allegations of racism, and then people just, jumped to conclusions very early and said, oh, it's racism. And then at the end of the day, they found it wasn't racism. There was something else. So I think when you approach issues of this nature, be open to the possibility that it could be racism, but when the evidence comes, then you confirm it. I think let's all follow that process. But, not the media. No. They need them clicks. They need the ratings, everything like that, right? So, I mean, I don't know if you saw when they were talking to Babalo Ndwayana, who was the person who was filming the video. They asked him, was there anything racial that led up to the incident? And he said no. And that is a very interesting moment. And let's see what Stellenbosch finds out in the end. Maybe they might find the racism. But then they start, now when that was said, Then they started talking about other alleged incidents of racism at Stellenbosch University and everything like that, just so that they can gain mileage on the issue by making irresponsible statements. And I just feel that that's not helping the situation at all. Someone in the media should just say, listen, we don't know for sure that it is racism. It is possible, but let's just wait for the end. They can just say that. But of course, that doesn't get you clicks to your website, and it doesn't get you, high ratings. That's the unfortunate thing.
Dumo, let me stick with you for a moment, because for me, what I found interesting, and your last point is absolutely spot on, that there is a racism inc, a racism industry, if you will, in this country that is absolutely desperate for any and all incidents to be blown up to become a national issue. Like, you can't even have a local incident anymore. Everything must be national in order to feed the narrative that they do prefer, that South Africa is a racist country and that all races in this country are at each other's throats. That's the narrative that we're definitely sold by politicians and the corporate media, is that we're about to kill each other black and white, and that, all incidents, big or small, point to a bigger national trend. But here's where it gets interesting for me. When you then ask these people two questions: number one, what should we do about this? The answers are very scant, usually. And then you start seeing the actual real protagonists come out. I like to call them the die lot, the diversity, inclusion, and equity grifters. These are people who basically look at these incidents, and for them, it is a cash cow. It is a cash cow in order to set up a racism economy, if you will, where they're given these jobs to be the arbiters of what is racism in a particular workplace, school, society. They're trying to infiltrate all institutions of society with this ideology, this die ideology that finds its rooting, of course, in that woke culture of, anti-racism, as is often, as was proposed by that Kendi chap, Ibram Kendi. That same sort of cultural Marxist ideology, this notion that this notion that given the failure of actual Marxism, 20th century definition of Marxism, which basically saw societies as being stratified between a oppressor and victim based on class, recognizing the failure of class analysis, then shifted from class analysis and saying, well, actually it's race, identity, gender, and all of that is the basis now of that old dichotomy of oppressor versus victim. It's those individuals who then, upon all of these incidents, will basically try and create a trend and argue now that you need us, the DIE people, the diversity, inclusion, and equity lot, the cultural Marxists that I'm referring to control interactions in society, because that's how you, quote, end racism, or more specifically, that's how you become a, quote, anti-racist. Talk to me about the nefarious and pernicious nature of these individuals, and why we're actually seeing them also on campuses like East Stellenbosch right now, grifting away, trying to take a hold of the institutions of Stellenbosch and other universities, really.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that it's a very problematic situation that these universities and corporations also find themselves in, because these people from the die crew, however you want to put it, these guys, they don't offer anything to society. Thomas Sowell puts it this way: these are people that studied soft subjects in university, and when they try to make themselves relevant in the market, their degrees are irrelevant, so they perform some sort of racketeering to become relevant. So they'll have to say that racism is a problem. I mean, technically it is, but it's not the biggest problem according to the IRR. But it's not like it's not something that's really holding people back, And I always said this. I said this on the Joe Emilio show once. I said, listen, guys, you can hire me as a die person. It'll be free. All I'm gonna do is go to when you do your diversity and inclusion training, I'm just gonna put one PowerPoint slide, and it's going to read the following: respect people, and then that's it. That's your diversity inclusion thing done. And that's all you need to do. And you saved a lot of money. Now you're going to pay these guys like R1 million a year to be told by people who are going to give you nonsense on how to not be racist, when really just like respecting people is like the best way to do it. So I'm sorry. These guys are grifters, and companies and schools must be very careful of them, because once they're in there, it's going to be very hard to get them out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Gabriel. Let me come to you because I again quoting Sowell. What's become patently clear for me now, and I think many other people, because I'm often a target for the die lot. As I like to stratify them as, blabbity blacks and the social justice warrior whites, both as toxic as the other. They're two sides of the same coin, really. Because in me even calling them that, they self-identify as wanting to be seen through the lens of race. But let me get to the question. I tweeted out along the lines, paraphrased Thomas Sowell, and I said, as the supply of racism in this country simply is not enough to meet the demand for racism by the likes of these blabbity blacks, social justice warrior whites, these cultural Marxists, if you will, who are trying to push this ideology into the institutions of society in order to corrupt them, of course, to make them racialized, to make them feed the narrative that they are required, as an industry, if you will. We're seeing this play out in Stellenbosch. There's guys like Abo Wilkinson, I just forgot his first name. Richard Wilkinson, who are examining this ideology infiltrate elite schools in the country, and it's becoming a massive problem because it's pitting. What is actually pitting people against each other in a racialized sense. But your thoughts on the Stellenbosch incident and the desperation to make it racial?
Yeah, so I want to second Dumo's comments that, let the investigation go as it does, and maybe we'll discover that Theuns du Toit was urinating on Babalo Ndonyana's laptop because he's a racist. I also want to repeat Sihle's point that we live, but I'm going to put it in a different term. We live with a new Immorality Act. Until 1985, you could F anyone as long as it was the same race. And now you can F anyone up as long as it's the same race. But if you touch someone across racial lines in anger, then it is racist. Then it must be front page news. If a black boy and a white boy at high school fight one another, then it is automatically racist. It's a new kind of Immorality Act. Fight amongst yourselves, but don't fight across. And I think that is toxic. I think that is completely mad. So here is a question. I drive down and I see the Citizen had a headline on the side of the road. You still get those headlines on the side of the road when you're driving down. It said racism, ... quote, tip of the iceberg. And then there's this piece and they're quoting some professor who says that, this is just the tip of the iceberg. You see the one incident and it proves the whole thing is there. Firstly, it's a very strange, and I remember Teresa Oakley Smith said, for every racist incident you see, it's like a flower, and you must remember the root system underground, or it's like a leaf, and the root system underground is always much, much more than the leaf. Why are you using these metaphors? If racism is so pervasive, why don't you do the statistical research and find evidence to support your point? We've done the statistical research. We find that it's not pervasive. We find that for example, most South Africans, like 80% of South Africans, say they'd much rather identify as South African first than any race. We find 80% of Black South Africans say they haven't personally experienced any form of racism in the last 5 years. Okay, so that means like 20% have, but 80% haven't. By the way, a better result than any country in the EU, and they've done surveys in all EU countries for any minority race. So, and the IRR statistics, I say it all the time. My question is this. If you want to do a systemic analysis, in other words, if you want to do the standard journalistic thing of saying, here's a story, it's interesting, it's gory, you can see the thing, the video, it's obviously already a meme. Let's try and look at a social issue that really matters underneath this, a big problem that we can use all the attention that's been garnered to address. What's the problem here? Is it racism? Bladen Zamanda says for sure it's racism. I see no evidence to support his confident conclusion that it's certainly racism. And I think that minister that makes the confident assertion without evidence is prejudice. That's what prejudice is saying for sure it is racist before you know for sure. That's prejudice. What if it's alcohol? In 2008, one of my primary school friends went to Stellenbosch University, and by May, now, he died in a drunk driving accident. That's a very sad story. I've got two happy stories. It's my 10-year anniversary from university. Sihle, as you know, I went to the top-ranked Ivy League university in America. Let me tell you, alcohol was a problem. One of my friends in freshman year urinated in a little freshman girl's sock drawer. He was so drunk, instead of going left, he went right. They were in a very old, fancy building, and the doors didn't lock. The lights were off. He didn't know what he was doing. Pulled over the sock drawer, urinated in a thing. You know what we did? We gave him flack. And we pressured him. And he felt humiliated. And he didn't drink for a month. And he started working harder. And he started getting his head straight. And surprisingly, he fell in love in that period. And today he's married to that woman he fell in love with for the last 5 years. And they work very hard.
That isn't the woman he peed in the room of,
no,
right?
No.
Oh.
But they became friendly. No. Another story. One night, I'm a second year. I'm sitting in bed studying. I've got a multivariable calculus exam in the morning. It's like 11 o'clock at night. Dude, this big Jim Bunny, my other roommate, there's like two bedrooms. The one from the other bedroom comes into my bedroom. He's drunk. He's like slurring away. He locks the door behind him. He's like, he can bench press 100. He can deadlift 230. He's wearing nothing but underpants. He jumps into the bed with me and wraps himself around me like a koala bear. And I thought, I always thought this guy was straight. I didn't realize what was happening with this friendship. I don't have the time to let this guy down gently. I need to study, but I can't get out of this. I'm like trying to stay. I'm like, can I still hold the book while maybe he'll just pass out? Then I realize he starts whispering into my ear. He says, I'm not going to say the name, but like, let's pretend it's Jimmy. He's like, Jimmy's going to kill me. You got to save me. Jimmy's going to kill me. So I'm like, what's going on? Then the bedroom door starts bashing and Jimmy's like, Didi, I know you're in there. I'm going to kill you. Let's call him Didi, had urinated on Jimmy's like $2,500 flat screen TV because he thought it was a toilet. He was so drunk, he thought it was a toilet. Dude, those oaks nearly did kill each other. I had to like scrum them apart, like stop him from breaking the door. I had to go clean up the pee from the floor, from the couch, from the carpet, from the TV. The TV had to get thrown away. The next day, I let Didi sleep in my bed. I went to the library to go study till breakfast. The next day, we had a serious conversation, and then we had to wait a week because we wouldn't talk to each other, any of us, after that, because we were also angry with each other. I failed my test, so I was a bit irritated with them for like distracting me. The next week we talked again, and we made a plan. And my friend was also a scholarship boy like me, so he worked double time, mopping the floor in the dining hall for a year to pay back half of that TV. And that changed his life. He learned to serve. By fourth year, he was a student leader. By graduation, I don't want to say what job he had, but he has led a very excellent career serving people in the most dilapidated cities in America. He learned a lesson from that thing. And the lesson that he learned was that alcohol is a very dangerous thing. He was allowing that to overwhelm the good side of his character and to bring out the ugly side of his character. He was allowing it to numb his sense of responsibility and manliness and duty. It was allowing it to be an escape route to absurdity and depravity. I mean, you see that thing. I see Tiens Tutoy and I see a lost young man. He's quite literally lost. And alcohol is not just a problem from these two anecdotes. I was doing a little bit of research. According to some study done by UNISA, 8 people per day die in drunk driving accidents from alcohol. According to a study co-done by the SAMRC, the South African Medical Research Council, 60,000 people die from alcohol-related disease per year. It's worse than COVID. No one talks about it. Here you have an instance where, as far as I can tell, maybe he's racist as well, but for sure he's drunk. For sure, he's misbehaving.
Mhm.
For sure, he needs discipline. We can say, for sure, at Stellenbosch, alcohol is a problem. You know how big a problem it is at Stellenbosch? In 2019 or 2020, February, because of how many sexual abuse cases were being connected to alcohol, they banned alcohol from residences. This week, there was allegedly a rape in Stellenbosch. Nobody has mentioned the problem with alcohol at Stellenbosch in connection with sexual violence or in connection with genuine, with young men ruining themselves. You want to talk about context. Stellenbosch's context with racism is that in 2016, two girls painted themselves purple, and then someone took a photograph in the dark and said it was blackface, and they got suspended. That's the major context of racism at Stellenbosch. The context of alcohol abuse at Stellenbosch is very serious. And I am saying this having a drink. I like to have a drink. I think you must drink responsibly. I think you must have respect for this thing. And we should have the conversation about it. It's an opportunity for that national conversation. Squandered. In the Sunday Times, in the Sunday World, in the Mail and Guardian, instead of doing anything like that, they repeat this claim that he said, this is what we do to black boys. That Theuns said to Babalo, this is what we do to black boys. Babalo himself said that's not what happened. He said, afterwards, he said, this is a white boy thing, which is a foolish thing to say. It's not a white boy thing. It's a flippant, alcoholic, stupid thing to do. If you are pissed enough, and it doesn't matter what color you are, you lose your marbles. That's why you mustn't overdo it. So Theuns must learn a lesson. But these Sunday papers, even though Babalo cleared it up on Tuesday, the Sunday papers are still repeating that misquotation. And that's your point. I'm coming back to your point, Sihle. The grifters. Oaks are making money out of this thing. They're pretending to try and serve the moral interests of the nation, but what they're really doing is retelling the simplest story. Yes, in South Africa, from the formation of this country until the late 80s, the 90s, the simplest story you could always tell is that the country is essentially racist and there's something depraved about that. Now it's 2022, and Oaks, rather than thinking maybe here alcohol is the problem, they still want to say it's apartheid. And I think for a lack of sensitivity to the moment and the issues that are actually confronting us, there's a lack of an ability to grasp the solutions that will take us to a better place going forward.
Guys, we're going to stick with this topic. Just indulge me with another 15 minutes. We'll end at 10. Because I do think this topic deserves a little bit of attention. There's quite a few nested features here around the narrative versus the truth. And that's where I began this inquiry at the beginning of it with my tweeting. And I said, guys, be very careful of the people in this country who prefer narrative over the truth. They don't care about the truth, in fact. Even if the truth comes out, they just forge straight ahead and say, well, maybe this incident wasn't that, but the overall trend still is X, Y, or Z, blah, blah, blah. Facts don't matter to Bona. The narrative actually matters. Dumo, let me come to you, because we've seen Labantu, and I must stress here, and just for the sake of for brevity's sake, we're not saying this isn't racism. We're not saying it is racism. We're saying surely there should be facts around this that are established, which then allow for appropriate action to be taken. But perhaps even as I say that, let me come back to these people who I argue prefer narrative over facts. They don't actually want, Dumo, sorry, as I get trapped by my own sentence construction here. The people who prefer narrative over facts don't actually want action to be taken here that is of a rational nature that affords everybody due process. They want to create a climate of fear, a climate of basically coercion, where might is right. And often what we often see as protest, right? And I put air quote bunnies there because sometimes this protest is of a threatening nature. It's designed to put actual, not even pressure, but actual threats to those who are decision makers. Say, if you don't give us the decision we want, then all hell will break loose. And they'll even cite historical examples like Abo fees must fall, Abo racism must fall. I'm trying to think of the Open Stellenbosch was the actual campaign that was driven at Stellenbosch in particular. They know that there is a track record which administrators would want to avoid by all means of actual wanton destruction of property and disruption of school time if they don't get what they want. And that's what's being done here. Or am I reading too much into this, Dumo?
Yeah, that's exactly what they want. And I really think that The reason why they push that is because the media can always label the students who could be aggressors in this situation as the victims. So they be fighting, and the media, as like we said, now they are going to be the ones trying to peddle this thing like, oh, they're just students, they just want to study, they just want justice. Look, bro, I'm gonna be honest with you. When I was at varsity, like I had no time for that, bro. I don't know if the work was too hard for me or what, but I didn't have time for that stuff. Like, I mean, I'm sorry. Like, you have all the time in the world. It just shows you that these students have all the time in the world. I mean, if I was like the chancellor, I would say, well, let's look at what degrees these guys are studying, right? And I'd say, put more. They must put more. They must get more credits. The more credits they have to get through, probably the more time they'll be spending in the library than going outside and trying to create a better world in a place where they're gonna stay in like for 5 years anyway. Like, what's the point? I mean, it's just madness. You know, as you said, I mean, you said this a few years ago. You said that universities have become the perfect place for wannabe politicians to start their careers. Now you must make it hard. So if you want to study something like a BA, you must make them do a BCom course, an engineering course, and whatever, and they must pass all of it. And if they fail, well, you can't get your degree. So something like that, or something of that nature. But now you have to set the standards even higher so that, you know, you can not have these type of people at university, because now we made it very easy for them to come in. And now what has happened is they created a climate of fear. And now if you respond even with the appropriate amount of force to defend yourself at the university, like let's say, for example, they destroy your property and you get the cops to protect them. I mean, the cop will shoot a rubber bullet and it'll hit someone on the head and they'll say it's a massacre. You know what I'm trying to say? So that's the problem. So I think ultimately the universities are going to have to sit and say, listen, we've got a problem. I think that, you know, we know where these problems are coming from. So we may have to, you know, increase our standards of entry, or if we don't keep them the same, if you keep them the same, we have to make it, they have to do something meaningful so that they don't have to be so taken over by this hive mind socialist leftist nonsense. Because really it is a dangerous situation to be in right now. And I just feel that, you know, I don't know how they're going to end it, but it's tough. It's tough. It's really tough.
No, absolutely. The most spot on. And thank you for reminding me of that quote that I'd made, because it sure as hell it panned out to be true. Look at all the people who started Abo fees must fall, roads must fall, racism must fall, university campuses must fall, you name it. Where are they now? Are they prosecuting the issue of racism on these campuses? Are they even addressing the bread and butter issues of the people who they at the time argued are, you know, the sole individuals who they care about the most? Blah, blah, blah. No, they're enjoying the high life as politicians, mostly in parliament, earning those near on R1 million a year salaries, and the pathway of destruction, and rather the trail of destruction they left in their march to power, is all but forgotten by them. But those university campuses are still dealing with the effects of it. But Gabriel, as we summate, there's something to be said here going forward about the need for institutions, and I want to repeat this word, institutions, to reaffirm the power of due process, of rational inquiry, and of actual justice. Not social justice, not justice for one grouping or another, as is preferred by these types, these diversity, inclusion, and equity types, these cultural Marxists, these woke lots, if you will, but actual, actual justice and actual due process, and for institutions to take precedence over the whims of one grouping or the other. That's the battle I think Stellenbosch has to wage and say, actually, we as administrators will follow this rational cause and will deal with anybody who tries to say that we shouldn't.
Yeah, it's funny that you said justice so many times, because it reminds me of Justice Edwin Cameron, former Constitutional Court Justice, now Chancellor of Stellenbosch, or a position like that. And his comment on this event was that it made him ashamed as a white person that such things still happen. I really want to say that for older South Africans that like struggled through apartheid and all kinds of things and who don't change their minds and stuff, like I can understand the mentality of thinking all white people are in a family and all black people are in a family. And then if one white person somewhere in Stellenbosch makes a fool of himself, I must feel ashamed as if it's my sister or my brother. And we're so close that if they do something wrong, it does make me feel bad. Dude, I don't feel like that. There's no connection between me and that chap. There's no metaphysical thing from my skin to his brain or his brain to my skin. And for a former constitutional court justice to say, as a white person, I feel ashamed because some white 18-year-old went and urinated in the wrong place, I think says something about, what does it mean to say this country hasn't come far enough? In a way, it means that literal court justices or former court justices haven't necessarily done the work. There really is such thing as doing the work, figuring out what it is to be a human being, and not a kind of ambassador for a skin color. So I find that very frustrating. I also find it prejudicial insofar as he has influence over the case, and he is saying by implication that this is a racist case. He's foreclosing the possibility that evidence will show one way or another. And that's your point, Sitley. Due process. There is really a very beautiful thing about the fact that the blindfold over justice, over Lady Justice with the scales, that image precedes slave trade, white on black racist history. That image was an image conjured up a very long time ago by people who had other kinds of tribal issues, more simple kinds of tribal issues in a way, but ones where you couldn't tell just by looking who belonged to what team, but you did know. If you know this Romeo and Juliet, the Montagues and the Capulets. If you were on one side, you had to kill the guy from the other side, and vice versa. It's all boo for them and all yay for us. That kind of absurdity, that is what I call the state of nature. Some people think that without the law, without a court system, everybody's going to be like Africa Burn, like slightly stoned and very nice to each other. But I think that only works for a weekend, right? And when you've brought a lot of money to the party, if you want to make money, if you're going to deal with people's selfishness, if you're going to deal with people when they're in a bad mood, you need a justice system, and you need it to be blind in certain ways. Specifically, you need it to be blind to the kinds of fashions that ultimately underlie fascism. I quite like Manchester United. If you push me far enough into a soccer mentality, then I could become another yob who's willing to stampede over another group of people. There really is a connection between fashion and fascism, which Hitler understood very well. He spent a lot of his time designing the uniforms, right? Because it's really about we all, whether it's by the uniform or by how we look in our skin or something, in some sense, we are all the same and they are all different, and we are all good and they are all the enemy. And it's an unreasonable and very emotive space to get into, and I think that it requires sobriety and seriousness and personal discipline to transcend that. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that Stellenbosch has what it takes to transcend that. But I know this country needs that to happen. And it needs it to happen at its academic institutions because, firstly, they tend the garden that does produce the fruit of the future. And secondly, in the present, they produce a hugely influential source of talk, of contributions to the battle of ideas. And at the moment, the best contribution I'm seeing is from some professor who says, well, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And then I've read the piece, doesn't have any data to back up that point. His thought is just that Racism is like this. If you see one incident, then you know it's everywhere.
Yes, Gabriel and Dumo, as I conclude, we must end the show here. I just saw a comment here by Untsiba Mwango. Shout out to you, Untsiba. Thanks for joining us tonight. And I, as I've always said, guys, this show is also about you, dear viewer. I post comments on the screen, whether they whether they agree or disagree or offer counterpoints. Like, the show is very much free speech. And Untsiba disagrees with us. And I want to say this: the last comment he put on screen here was interesting for me, which was, one thing is for sure, why people are so united in defending their own. That is Untsiba Mwango. But here's the problem, Untsiba, and maybe you're missing the point of the conversation here tonight. And that's pointing out that what you're phrasing is exactly the problem. The idea that there should be whites who defend whites because they're whites, or blacks who defend blacks because they're black, or Khaleds or Indians, and so forth, is exactly the problem. It's that racialized thinking that is exactly the problem. It's that racialized thinking that is demanded by the protesters, funny enough, in arguing that because the student is white, de facto he did what he did because he is a white racist, is exactly the problem. Who are you to make that inference? Who are you to suggest that simply because of the color, the hue on someone's skin, that their actions and motives were of a nature determined by the race of the other? That's the problem. It's that false assumption that we can judge people by the color of their skin that is the actual issue here. Whereas I'm arguing, and I think the rest of my panelists are arguing here, that actually no. At the end of the day, we're all individuals, Baba. We're all individuals. We make our decisions independent of what we look like, or what's between our legs insofar as our gender, or even our identity. We are all individuals made in God's image, Hashem's image in particular. And that sometimes we as society need to take a step back and go, how do I view this incident through that very lens of what was this individual's motives here? And hey, as we both said, or all three of us said here, it could have very well may been racism. No one's precluding that possibility. But to suggest simply because one is white and the other is black that it is de facto racism is part of being an actual racist yourself. Maybe stew on that, man. That'll be my final thought on this one as we end the show. Thank you very much for watching. As always, on Liberty and Friends, I give my guests an opportunity for them to tell you how they can be found on their social media. Gabriel, how can we find you, Bafo, on social media, and any articles in the Daily Friend we should look out for?
Thanks, Hitler. Yes, so I am not on social media, but I had a piece this week in News 24 about the mask mandate, quoting some studies that are not looking good for people who want to force other people to wear masks. So go check that out. And if you want to go to the IRR webpage, our campaign, irr.org.za, you'll see the Free Your Face campaign. It really, really, really is important to get the government off your face. It's literally for what it does to your own brain, and also for what it will do to our cultural institutions, our sporting institutions, to allow people to go into places where they can be entertained by creative South Africans who have put in time and energy and talent to do extraordinary things that we are currently basically not allowed to see. I will also say that I am a piece in the Daily Friend will be coming forward about the Stellenbosch case. There's a lot of question marks there, but there's a lot to say about problems in this country that are too easily overlooked.
Absolutely. Fully agreed, Butwami. Thank you very much. That is Gabriel Crouse, of course, from the Institute of Race Relations, also a contributor on the Daily Friend and co-host of Two Crickets in a Thorn Tree. Dumo, host of the Manpatria Show. Baba, what can we expect Sasa tomorrow, Monday, 7 p.m. on the Manpatria Show?
Yeah, man, it's going to be an interesting one. We're going to be discussing the Stellenbosch case, and you're also going to be discussing the 22 million rand flagpole and other issues that also come up during the day as well. So please catch us on YouTube at 7 o'clock tomorrow. It's going to be a really wild show. So please, guys, please do that. And also, if you want more information about Manpatria, just go to manpatria.com.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to that. I think I'll still be driving to Cape Town during then, so I'll definitely play it in the background in the car as I'm making that drive tomorrow from Cape Town to, from Durban to Cape Town. Dumo, how do the folks find you on social media? I don't think you mentioned though. How do they find
Oh
you?
yeah. Oh yes. Twitter at Dumo Denga or the Manpatria account is at Manpatria_ZA. Yes.
Lovely. That is what Dumo Denga, the host, as I said, of the Manpatria show. A big thanks to him, and a big thank you to you, the viewer of the show. You guys literally make the show what it is. A big thank you for joining me every Sunday on the show. You are helping me grow this channel. And yeah, guys, big things being planned and big things underway already as we work to secure a few things. With that being said, I will be in Cape Town and based in Cape Town for the next 2, maybe 3 weeks as we try and secure some stuff down there, hopefully, please God. Some funding also comes through that can help us build our studio here in Durban. If you want to contribute to any of that, hey, maybe you want to become one of those people who contribute to the show. People are contributing 100 Rand a month, literally, guys. And really, it's the price of what? A burger and a Coke these days, and maybe a small chips. But 100 Rand a month is more than enough. It helps put diesel in the Bheki as we begin to produce content now, which is why we're traveling and hitting the road again. Yeah, that being said, thank you for watching another installment of Liberty and Friends. This is the 53rd episode of the show. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button on the way out. And remember, as I always say at the end of every show, I can see some of you were preempting it already, and that is never trust a commie or a commie who's telling you monkeypox is coming. That's the new grift. Cheers, guys. Good night.